This month's calendar grid is all about geometric shapes. Before we look at the calendar grid, first we need to talk about some important vocabulary. Our first vocabulary word is adjacent. Adjacent means two sides that are next to each other and touch. You can see here in the example, these two sides are next to each other and they touch to form this angle. So these two sides are called adjacent. Our next vocabulary word is congruent. Congruent means objects that are the same exact shape and size. The two gray triangles over here are congruent because they are the exact same shape and size. One is just turned a different way from the other. Our next vocabulary word is kite. Kite is a shape with two pairs of congruent adjacent sides. These three shapes are kites because these two sides are congruent and these two sides are congruent. The same thing over here. These two sides are congruent and these two sides are congruent. And finally, these two sides are congruent and these two sides are congruent. Kites have that traditional kite shape like what you see flying in the sky. Our next vocabulary word is opposite. Opposite means two sides that are across the shape from each other and do not touch. These two sides with one notch on them are opposite, and these two sides with two notches on them are opposite. Our next vocabulary word is parallel. Parallel means two things that are always the same distance apart. These two lines are parallel because if you extend them, they will always be that far apart. These three lines are parallel because if you extend them, they will always be that far apart. They will never touch. These two opposite sides of this shape are parallel, but these two opposite sides are not. If you extended these lines, they would touch. Our next vocabulary word is parallelogram. A parallelogram is a shape with four sides that has two pairs of opposite sides that are parallel. Take a look at these shapes. Find their opposite sides. Notice how if you extended the opposite sides of these shapes, they would never touch. That means that the opposite sides are parallel. And since both pairs of opposite sides are parallel, these are all parallelograms. Our next vocabulary word is quadrilateral. A quadrilateral is any shape with four sides. These are all examples of quadrilaterals because all of these shapes have four sides. A rhombus is a shape with four equal sides. All of these shapes are rhombuses because all four sides of each shape are equal. And our last vocabulary word is square. A square is a shape with four equal sides and four right angles. That means that the angles are exact corners. So you can see this is a square because all of its sides are equal and it has those corners. All of these images are squares, even though some of them are tilted. Now let's get to our calendar grid observations. For each day, we need to define the shape, count the number of pairs of parallel sides, and count the number of pairs of congruent sides, as well as the number of pairs of congruent angles. Let's start with day 1. Let's see. Day 1 has parallel. Does it have parallel sides? Let's look. Are any of these sides parallel? No. So we'll write 0 pairs of parallel sides. What about congruent sides? I see 2 of these sides are red and 2 of them are blue. That means that the red sides are congruent and the blue sides are congruent. That makes 1 pair and another pair, so we have 2 pairs of congruent sides. What about congruent angles? I wonder, is this angle down here equal to any of the other angles? What about this angle up here? These 2 angles look like they would be the same. So we'll say there is 1 pair of congruent angles. Let's go back up to our definitions to figure out what kind of shape this is. Is that a square that we saw? No. What about a rhombus? Almost, but not all of its sides are congruent. It's a quadrilateral, not a parallelogram, but it really looks like a kite. I think this shape is a kite. The next 4 are your turn. For each shape, you will define its name, tell the number of pairs of parallel sides, tell the number of pairs of congruent sides, and the number of pairs of congruent angles. Use your vocabulary words to help you with the shape and finding parallel and congruent sides.